I am sitting in a squeaky plastic lawn chair in the middle of my driveway. The air in Clearwater, Florida, is basically warm soup at all times, so I am already sweating through my t-shirt. I do not care. I am holding a perfectly chilled mojito in a plastic cup, and I am looking up. Right above my roof, painting the humid night sky, are 500 synchronized drones flashing a blinding, toxic neon pink. The collective buzzing sounds like a plague of mechanical locusts. It is, without a doubt, the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. And then, I see her, Brenda. She is sprinting across my freshly cut St. Augustine grass. She's wearing a pastel fuzzy bathrobe that is practically glowing in the drone light, and her matching fuzzy slippers are rapidly absorbing the evening dew. She is waving a clipboard in the air like she's trying to wave off a fighter jet on an aircraft carrier. "Turn them off!" she is screeching, her voice cracking over the hum of the drones. "Turn them off right this second!" I take a slow, deliberate sip of my mojito. The mint is really hitting the spot tonight. I don't say a word. I just smile. How did we get here? How did a totally normal Tuesday night turn into a cyberpunk light show designed specifically to break the spirit of a middle-aged HOA president? Let me rewind. 3 weeks ago, my biggest enemy wasn't an overzealous neighborhood dictator. It was a raccoon. I had just moved into Whispering Pines, a subdivision where all the houses are painted varying shades of beige, and the grass length is regulated with the strictness of a military compound. I like it quiet. I like keeping to myself. But the local wildlife had other plans. Every single night, around 2 a.m., a raccoon the size of a golden retriever would tip over my trash cans. It wasn't just eating garbage. It was tossing empty cans of beans across the concrete like it was looking for a specific vintage. So I did what any rational human being would do. I went to the local hardware store and dropped $40 on 2 standard run-of-the-mill motion sensor security lights. Nothing crazy. I didn't buy stadium floodlights. I didn't buy military-grade lasers. They were just 2 little white plastic fixtures that I screwed into the wood trim right above the garage doors. The idea was simple. Raccoon approaches, lights click on, raccoon gets spooked. I get to sleep. The first night I installed them, it worked like a charm. I heard the rustle of the bushes. I saw a flash of light through my bedroom blinds, and then I heard the rapid scratching of little claws retreating into the night. Victory. The next morning, at precisely 8:01 a.m., my doorbell rang. I opened the door in my sweatpants, holding a mug of coffee. Standing on my porch was a woman who looked like she ironed her jeans. She had short, aggressively styled blonde hair, and was holding a clipboard tightly against her chest. "Can I help you?" I asked, taking a sip of coffee. "I am Brenda," she said, not offering her hand. "President of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. We need to talk about the unauthorized modifications to your dwelling." I blinked. "The what?" "The lights." She pointed a rigid, manicured finger at my garage. "Those aggressively luminescent fixtures you bolted to the front of your property without submitting an architectural review committee request form." I almost laughed, but her face was completely devoid of humor. "You mean the motion lights? They're for the raccoons. I don't care if they are for the second coming," Brenda snapped, pulling a pink slip of paper from her clipboard. "They are an eyesore. Furthermore, the wattage is entirely inappropriate for a residential zone. They gave me a terrible migraine last night." I leaned against the doorframe. "Brenda, you live 3 houses down, and my house faces a solid brick privacy wall. You literally cannot see the front of my garage from your house unless you're hiding in my bushes." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm just questioning the physics of your headache," I replied. She ripped the pink slip off the clipboard and shoved it into my free hand. "This is a formal citation. $500. Payable within 14 days. I looked down at the paper. It was an actual invoice. $500 for 2 light bulbs? "Read the bylaws," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Section 4, paragraph 2. Any unapproved permanent light fixtures causing community distress are strictly prohibited, and subject to immediate financial penalty. You have 48 hours to remove them, or I will fine you again." She turned on her heel and marched down my driveway. I stood there, dumbfounded, holding a $500 piece of paper over $40 worth of plastic. I should have just taken them down. I know that. Any normal person would have just unscrewed the lights, paid the fine to avoid the headache, and bought a bungee cord for the trash cans. But I am not a normal person. When you back me into a corner over something stupid, my brain doesn't look for an exit. It looks for a shovel so I can dig the trenches. That afternoon, I decided to play nice. Maliciously nice. I didn't take the lights down. Instead, I got on a stepladder, loosened the hinges, and pointed the bulbs straight down. I mean, directly down. They were practically kissing the concrete of the driveway. They wouldn't shine into the street. They wouldn't shine into the bushes. They would only illuminate a 3-foot circle of my own property. I snapped a picture, emailed it to the HOA board's official address with the subject line, "Modifications made to ensure zero light pollution. Invoice disputed." I slept great that night. No raccoons, no blinding lights. The next morning, the doorbell rang. 8:01 a.m. I opened it. "Brenda, clipboard." "Good morning, Brenda," I said, leaning casually against the door. "Did the lights give you a migraine through the concrete last night?" She didn't blink. She just pulled another pink slip from her clipboard and handed it to me. "What is this?" I asked, my smile fading. "Another $500, she said flatly. "For what?" "They are pointing at the ground." "The reflection," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "The reflection off your driveway concrete is creating an ambient glow that is disrupting the nocturnal sleep patterns of the neighborhood geckos. It is an ecological hazard." I stared at her. I literally stopped breathing for 3 seconds to process the words that had just come out of her mouth. "The sleep patterns of the geckos? We are a nature-conscious community," she sneered. "Remove the fixtures, now." "No," I said. "Excuse me?" I said no, Brenda. I'm not paying $1,000, and I'm not taking down my security lights because you have an imaginary vendetta and a clipboard. "Then I will see you at the disciplinary hearing on Thursday," she said, her eyes flashing with absolute triumph. "Bring your checkbook." Thursday night, the Whispering Pines Clubhouse. It smelled like chlorine from the community pool and stale coffee. I walked in and sat in the front row of the folding metal chairs. Brenda was sitting at a long folding table at the front of the room, flanked by 2 elderly men who looked like they were asleep with their eyes open. "Next item on the agenda," Brenda announced into a microphone that was way too loud. "The matter of the unauthorized and hostile illumination at Lot 42. I stood up. "Hi. Lot 42 here. I'd like to appeal these fines. The lights are not permanent. They are screwed into a piece of decorative wood trim, they run on batteries, and they do not violate any state or local city ordinances regarding light pollution." Brenda slammed a gavel on the table. Where did she even get a gavel? "City ordinances do not matter here," she barked into the mic, causing a horrible screech of feedback. "You signed the HOA covenant when you purchased the home. The covenant is the supreme law of this neighborhood." "It's a plastic light, Brenda," I argued, my voice echoing off the cheap linoleum floor. "Section 4, paragraph 2, she yelled back. "If it is attached to your property, I control it. Period. I control the trim, I control the walls, I control the roof. If it is physically attached to the dwelling, it falls under my jurisdiction. Remove the fixtures by Friday at 5 p.m., or we will place a lien on your house." A lien. On my house. Over a raccoon deterrent. I looked around the room. A few neighbors were staring at the floor, clearly terrified of her. The 2 men next to her hadn't moved. She had absolute power, and she was intoxicated by it. "If it's attached to the property, you control it," I repeated slowly. "That is correct," she smirked. "Okay," I said, nodding. "Message received." I walked out of the clubhouse. I drove home in absolute silence. I walked into my garage, grabbed my drill, climbed up the stepladder, and unscrewed the 2 lights. I pulled them off the trim, tossed them into the trash can, and walked inside. Later that night, around 2 a.m., I heard the crash. My driveway was pitch black. The raccoon had returned. It knocked over the recycling bin, sending glass bottles shattering across the pavement. War was officially declared. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen island with my laptop open, staring at a PDF of the Whispering Pines HOA bylaws. I read every single page. I read every single clause. Brenda was completely, infuriatingly right. The bylaws were ironclad. They had total dictatorial control over any structure, fixture, modification, or object that was attached to the land or the dwelling. They controlled the paint. They controlled the grass length. They controlled the shingles. But as I was reading the exact phrasing of her precious Section 4, a word jumped out at me. Attached. If it is attached to your property, I control it. That was her exact quote. That was the legal framework of the HOA. They govern the physical structures attached to the earth. I opened a new tab. I typed, "Does an HOA own the air above my house?" I spent 3 hours falling down a rabbit hole of property rights, real estate law, and municipal zoning codes. It was mostly gray areas and local ordinances, nothing solid enough to beat Brenda in a legal fistfight. But then, at 4:30 a.m., my eyes burning from the screen glare, I found it. The Holy Grail. The Silver Bullet. Title 49 of the United States Code, Section 40,103. I read the text aloud in my dark kitchen. The United States government has exclusive sovereignty of airspace of the United States. I started clicking frantically, reading legal precedents and FAA rulings. The Federal Aviation Administration regulates all navigable airspace. From the moment you leave the blades of grass on your lawn, you are entering federal jurisdiction. A homeowner owns the right to build up to a certain height, but they do not own the air. And more importantly, a homeowners association, which is a private corporate entity, has absolutely zero legal authority to regulate, restrict, or govern navigable airspace. If a drone is flying over your house, the HOA cannot do a single thing about it. Only the FAA can. A slow, terrifying grin spread across my face. Brenda controlled everything attached to my house, but she didn't control the sky. If I couldn't attach security lights to my garage, I would just have to float them. And if I was going to float them, why settle for 2 battery-powered bulbs? Why not make a statement? I didn't just need a drone. I needed a fleet. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I sat on my couch and started making phone calls. I searched for commercial drone light shows, Florida. Most of them were massive companies that only booked Super Bowls or theme parks. But on page 3 of the search results, I found a company based out of Tampa called Aero Matrix Solutions. Their website looked like it was designed in 2004, but their demo reel showed hundreds of drones making corporate logos in the sky. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. "Aero Matrix, this is Zip," a voice said. He sounded like he was chewing on a piece of metal. "Hi, Zip. I have a project," I said. "I need a drone light show. But it's not for a corporate event. It's for my driveway." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Your driveway?" "Yeah. I live in an HOA in Clearwater. The president is trying to fine me $1,000 and put a lien on my house over a security light. I need to illuminate my property without attaching anything to my house." I heard the sound of a soda can opening. Wait, Zip said, suddenly sounding very awake. "Are you telling me you want to hire a commercial drone swarm to aggressively comply with an HOA bylaw?" "That is exactly what I am telling you." Zip let out a laugh that sounded like a barking seal. "Bro, that is the most toxic, beautifully petty thing I have ever heard in my entire life. I am literally drinking a Monster energy drink right now, and my heart rate just spiked. Talk to me. What's the vision?" "I need as many drones as you can get. I want them bright. I want them to hover directly over my property line, and I want them to spell something out. How big is your lot?" Quarter acre. Okay, tight airspace, but we can stack them vertically. We use custom micro drones, super high lumen LEDs. We can comfortably fit about 500 in a vertical cylinder formation over a quarter acre without crossing property lines. 500? I gasped. How much is that going to cost? Usually, about 15 grand, Zip said. My heart sank. Oh, I can't afford that for a prank. Bro, did you not hear me? Zip interrupted. I said usually. My mom lives in an HOA. They fined her $200 because her mailbox was a quarter-inch too low. I hate these people with the fire of 1,000 suns. I consider this pro bono public service. Pay for the gas, the crew's dinner, and the permitting fees. Call it $2 grand. Zip, you are an American hero. I know, he said. Now we have to talk legal. You can't just throw 500 drones in the air in a residential neighborhood without the feds knocking down your door. I know, I replied. I looked up Title 49, Section 40,103. The FAA controls the airspace, not the HOA. Look at you doing your homework, Zip cheered. Exactly. To pull this off, we need a Part 107 waiver for night operations and a swarm waiver. Because we're a licensed commercial outfit, we already hold a blanket waiver for night ops, but we have to file a specific flight plan with the FAA for your coordinates. It takes about 48 hours to get the airspace authorization. Friday, I said. She gave me a deadline of Friday at 5 p.m. to remove my fixtures. I want them in the air on Friday night. Done, Zip said. Email me your address. We'll file the paperwork today. Oh, and man? Yeah? What do you want them to spell? I grinned. I'll text you the script. Friday rolled around, and honestly, the anticipation was making me physically nauseous. But in a good way. Like the kind of nervous energy you get right before you pull off a perfectly orchestrated heist. The deadline Brenda had given me was 5 p.m. By 4 p.m., I was sitting on my porch, drinking an iced tea, just waiting. The street was quiet. Too quiet. I could literally see the blinds twitching in Brenda's front window 3 houses down. I knew she was in there, probably pacing, probably clutching her little clipboard, waiting for the clock to strike 5 so she could march over and slap a line on my house. At 4:15 p.m., a matte black Mercedes Sprinter van rolled into my driveway. It didn't have any logos on it. It just looked incredibly tactical, like the FBI was showing up to raid my garage. The doors popped open, and 3 guys jumped out. The driver was Zip. He looked exactly like he sounded on the phone. He was wearing a faded graphic tee, cargo shorts, and had a pair of pit viper sunglasses resting on the back of his neck. He was carrying a literal gallon jug of neon yellow liquid that I assumed was just pure liquid anxiety. Yo! Zip yelled, walking up to the porch and giving me a high five that almost dislocated my shoulder. We made it. Airspace authorization cleared at 1 p.m. today. We have a green light from the feds to completely own the sky from sunset to midnight. You are a lifesaver, I said, stepping off the porch. Did you bring them? Bro, I brought the whole armada. Zip grinned. He waved at his 2 crew members, who were already pulling massive black Pelican cases out of the back of the van. They hauled the cases onto my backyard grass. I mean, my lot isn't huge, but they moved with insane precision. They popped the latches, and inside were rows and rows of these sleek black micro-drones. They looked like giant, angry beetles. So here's the deal, Zip said, talking a mile a minute while he started pulling drones out and placing them on the grass in a massive grid formation. We've got 500 units here. They all run off a centralized, localized network tied to my laptop. The FAA waiver is strict. We cannot breach your property lines on the X and Y axis. We have to stay entirely within the vertical column of your property, which means we're going straight up. How high? I asked. We're authorized up to 400 feet, but I'm going to cap it at about 150. So the viewing angle from the street is perfectly optimized for maximum psychological damage, Zip said, taking a massive swig from his jug. We've pre-programmed the flight path. Once I hit execute, they auto-calibrate, ascend, lock into formation, and ignite the LEDs. It's entirely automated. I looked toward the street. "Hey, Zip, don't look now, but she's watching." Zip didn't turn his head, but a massive grin spread across his face. "The final boss? Is she in the window?" "Yeah, with binoculars." "Beautiful," Zip whispered. "Let her watch." By 4:55 p.m., my entire backyard looked like a landing pad for a miniature alien invasion. 500 drones sat in perfectly measured rows, their tiny green status lights blinking in unison. Zip had set up a folding table on my patio with a massive laptop and 2 antennas. At 5 p.m., my phone buzzed. An email from the Whispering Pines HOA board. To the resident of Lot 42. The deadline for compliance has passed. Fines will be doubled, and legal proceedings for a property lien will commence on Monday morning. I showed the screen to Zip. "Monday morning?" Zip laughed. "Honestly, she's not going to make it to Monday morning. She's going to have a stroke by 9 p.m. We wait for dark. We ordered pizzas. We hung out in the garage. By 8:30 p.m., the Florida sun had finally dipped below the horizon, and the sky turned into that deep, heavy black that only happens when the humidity is pushing 90%. The neighborhood was dead silent, save for the occasional chirp of a cicada. "Showtime," Zip said, wiping pizza grease off his hands and cracking his knuckles. He sat down at the laptop. "System check. Battery levels are green. GPS lock is solid. Airspace is clear." I walked out to the driveway and set up my lawn chair. I made myself a fresh mojito. I wanted a front row seat. "Execute," Zip said. A low hum started in the backyard. It sounded like a massive swarm of bees waking up. Then, the hum turned into a whine, and the whine turned into a roar. I looked up. Rising over the roofline of my house was a massive, dark cloud. The drones lifted off in absolute synchronization, a perfect, undulating wave of technology. They rose straight up into the night sky, their rotors cutting through the humid air. The noise was incredible. It wasn't ear-shattering, but it was impossible to ignore. Dogs in the neighborhood immediately started barking. They hit 150 feet, and then they stopped. They hovered there, a dark mass blocking out the stars. "Locking formation!" Zip yelled from the back patio. "Igniting LEDs in 3, 2, 1. Boom. 500 ultra-high lumen LEDs kicked on simultaneously. The light was blinding. It was like a second sun had just spawned directly over my house, except this sun was a toxic, aggressive neon pink. The entire street lit up. My driveway, the neighbor's roof, the asphalt, everything was washed in this insane pink glow. And then, the drones shifted. They started moving, dancing in the air, repositioning themselves until the pink blob morphed into crisp, glowing letters. They spelled out in massive, floating text that was visible from probably 2 miles away. HOA Bylaw 4.2. The drones held it for 5 seconds. Then they shifted again, flashing to neon green. No permanent fixtures. Another 5 seconds. They flashed to a blinding, icy blue. These are temporary. I literally started laughing out loud in my lawn chair. It was so petty. It was so glorious. I took a sip of my mojito. "Zip, you are an artist," I yelled toward the backyard. "Wait for the finale," he yelled back. The letters dissolved, the drones swirling around each other like a tornado of light, before snapping into a final formation. A giant, yellow, perfectly round, smiley face, and it was winking. Doors started opening up and down the street. Neighbors were stepping out onto their porches in their pajamas, pointing up at the sky. Some people were taking out their phones and recording. A guy across the street was actually cheering. And then I heard the screeching. It was Brenda. We had officially caught up to the cold open. She came tearing out of her front door, sprinting down the sidewalk in a pastel fuzzy bathrobe, her matching slippers slapping against the concrete. She was clutching her phone in one hand and her clipboard in the other. "Turn them off!" she screamed, her voice cracking with absolute hysteria. "Turn them off right this second!" She ran right onto my grass, not even caring that she was violating her own rules about walking on other people's lawns. "I am calling the police!" she yelled, jabbing her finger at the giant winking smiley face in the sky. "This is an act of terrorism. You are terrorizing this community." "Brenda, relax," I said, not getting out of my chair. "They aren't permanent fixtures. They're just catching some air." She held her phone up to her face. It was already on speakerphone. "Yes, 911. I need officers at Whispering Pines immediately. Lot 42 is conducting a cyber attack on the neighborhood. There are unidentified flying objects radiating illegal light pollution directly into my retinas. He is trying to blind me." "Ma'am, did you say a cyber attack?" The dispatcher's confused voice echoed out of the phone. "Just send the police," Brenda shrieked, hanging up. She turned her fury back to me. "You are going to jail. Do you hear me? Jail. I am going to have you evicted. I am taking your house, and I am pressing charges for assault." "Assault?" I asked, genuinely curious. "With what?" "Photonic assault," she declared, which I am pretty sure is a phrase she made up on the spot. I just smiled and took another sip of my drink. I guess we'll see what the cops have to say about it. We didn't have to wait long. About 5 minutes later, 2 Clearwater police cruisers came flying down the street, their blue and red lights flashing, completely clashing with the neon yellow smiley face, still hovering over my roof. The cruisers parked at awkward angles on the street, and 2 officers stepped out. One was a younger guy who looked a little confused. The other was an older, heavy-set officer with a mustache that looked like it had seen some things. Officer Friendly. They both got out, shut their doors, and immediately looked up. The younger cop literally let out a laugh before covering his mouth. Officer Friendly just stared at the giant, winking smiley face for a solid 10 seconds, sighed heavily, and adjusted his utility belt. Brenda pounced on them before they even reached my driveway. "Officers!" she yelled, practically shoving her clipboard into Officer Friendly's chest. "Thank God you're here. This man is running an illegal light show. He is violating the HOA covenants, he is operating unauthorized aircraft, and he is creating a public hazard. I want him arrested and those machines shot down." Officer Friendly looked at Brenda, then looked at me sitting in the lawn chair with my mojito. He slowly walked up my driveway. "Evening, sir," he said, his voice flat. "Care to explain why there is a Times Square billboard hovering over your garage?" "Good evening, officer," I said, finally standing up and setting my drink down. "Just enjoying a little temporary illumination. My HOA president here told me I wasn't allowed to have permanent security lights attached to my garage. So I hired a contractor to provide some temporary unattached lighting." "That is a lie!" Brenda screamed. "He is doing this to mock me. Shoot them down. It is unauthorized airspace invasion." Officer Friendly held up a hand to stop her. "Ma'am, please, let me handle this." He turned back to me. "Sir, I appreciate the creativity, but you can't just fly a massive drone swarm in a residential neighborhood. That's a massive safety hazard, and without the proper permits, it's a federal offense." "Ah," I said, reaching into my back pocket. "You mean the permits for navigating federal airspace?" I pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to him. It was a printed copy of the FAA Part 107 waiver Zip had secured, along with a highlighted printout of 49 USC, Parangwar 40,103. The officer unfolded the paper. He pulled a small flashlight off his belt and clicked it on, reading over the document. "As you can see, officer," I said clearly, making sure Brenda could hear every single word. "That is an official authorization from the Federal Aviation Administration for a commercial nighttime swarm operation at this exact GPS coordinate, valid from 8 p.m. to midnight. The contractor running the equipment is a licensed commercial pilot. The operation is entirely legal and federally sanctioned." The younger cop peeked over his partner's shoulder to look at the paperwork. He raised an eyebrow. "It's legit, Sarge. Has the FAA watermark and the authorization code? Officer Friendly turned the flashlight off and handed the papers back to me. He looked deeply, profoundly tired. Officers, what are you doing? Brenda demanded, stepping forward. He is violating Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the Whispering Pines Bylaws. He is causing community distress. You have to shut it down. Officer Friendly turned to Brenda, and you could see the exact moment his patience completely evaporated. Ma'am, he said, his voice dropping an octave. This man has federal clearance from the FAA. The United States government controls the airspace above this neighborhood. You do not. Brenda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air. But the bylaws. Your HOA bylaws do not supersede federal law, the officer said, delivering the fatal blow. His drones are not attached to his property, therefore they are not your jurisdiction. This is an FAA matter. We have absolutely no authority to ground those drones, and quite frankly, neither do you. But the light, she stammered, pointing frantically at the sky. It's giving me a migraine. Then I suggest you go inside and close your blinds, ma'am, Officer Friendly said. Because if you keep trespassing on this man's lawn and screaming at him, I'm going to have to cite you for disturbing the peace. Brenda froze. Her eyes darted from the cop, to me, to the glowing yellow smiley face in the sky, and back to me. Her face was turning a shade of red that I didn't even know was humanly possible. It was like she was physically rebooting, unable to process the fact that her absolute authority had just been vaporized by a loophole she couldn't control. This isn't over, she hissed, her voice trembling with absolute rage. I am calling the HOA lawyers in the morning. We will see you in court. She turned around and power walked, because Brenda doesn't run unless it's an emergency, back to her house, slamming the front door so hard I thought the glass was going to shatter. Officer Friendly watched her go, then looked back up at the drones. The smiley face was still blinking. Sir, he said, looking back at me. Yes, officer? How much did this cost? Honestly? Way less than you'd think? He shook his head, a tiny smirk finally breaking through his mustache. Have a good night. Try to shut them down by 10. People gotta sleep. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The cops got back in their cruisers and drove off, leaving me standing in my driveway under the neon glow of my ultimate victory. I walked around to the backyard. Zip was sitting in a camping chair, monitoring the laptop with a massive grin on his face. Did she cry? Zip asked. No, I laughed. But I think her soul left her body. Beautiful, Zip said. Want me to switch it back to the bylaw text? Yeah, leave it up until 10. Let the whole neighborhood memorize it. Honestly, the next morning was just surreal. I woke up around 9 a.m., poured myself a cup of coffee, and checked my phone. The Whispering Pines community WhatsApp group, which is usually just people complaining about somebody parking too far from the curb or asking if anyone lost a calico cat, was literally exploding. I mean, my phone had over 400 unread notifications. I scrolled up to the top of the absolute chaos. Gary from Lot 12 had posted a blurry video of the neon smiley face with the caption, "Did the aliens finally land, or did someone drug my tap water?" Susan from Lot 50 was typing in all caps about how her golden retriever hadn't stopped shaking since 8:30 p.m. But the best part, honestly, was the silent majority. For every angry message from Brenda's loyalists complaining about the photonic terrorism, there were 3 messages from people secretly loving it. Someone even made a meme out of the glowing drone text and set it as their profile picture. The neighborhood was completely divided. Half of them thought I was an absolute legend, and the other half were genuinely terrified that I possessed the technological capability to launch a tactical strike on their begonias. I took my coffee outside and walked down the driveway. The morning air was already sticky and thick. I looked at my trash cans. Pristine. Not a single scratch. The recycling bin was standing perfectly upright. The raccoons had obviously seen the wrath of 500 glowing, buzzing robotic hornets and decided that this particular house was strictly off-limits forever. I took a deep breath of the humid Florida air. It smelled like victory. But I knew Brenda wasn't done. People like her don't just give up because a cop told them they were wrong. They double down. And sure enough, at 10:15 a.m., a mass email went out to the entire community. Subject line in all bold, "Emergency Board Convening." The email stated that an emergency session was being held on Monday evening at the clubhouse to address an unprecedented technological threat to community safety, and to vote on an immediate amendment to the bylaws regarding unauthorized aerial vehicles. She was actually trying to ban the sky. I literally had to sit down on my couch because I was laughing so hard my ribs hurt. She thought she could just draft a Word document, print it out on her little clipboard, and suddenly have jurisdiction over the Federal Aviation Administration. I texted my buddy Dave. Dave is a corporate lawyer in downtown Tampa. He doesn't deal with HOA disputes. He usually deals with multi-million-dollar contract litigations. But he loves petty drama more than anyone I know. I gave him the rundown. His only response was a text saying, "I am wearing my most intimidating suit. See you at 6:30. Monday night rolled around. The Whispering Pines clubhouse was packed. I mean, usually these meetings have maybe 10 people who just want the free stale cookies, but tonight, it was standing room only. Every single folding chair was taken. People were lining the walls. The air conditioning was struggling to keep up with the body heat. I walked in right at 7 p.m. with Dave. Dave is 6'3", wears a custom-tailored Navy suit, and carries a leather briefcase that looks like it costs more than my car. He looks like a guy who ruins companies for a living. The room went completely silent as we walked down the center aisle. Brenda was sitting at the front table, flanking her 2 sleepy board members. She looked exhausted. The bags under her eyes were prominent, and her hair was pinned back in a way that screamed desperation. She slammed her gavel. Again, why does she have a gavel? Onto the plastic table. "This emergency meeting of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association is now called to order," she announced, her voice echoing shrilly through the microphone. "We are here to vote on Emergency Amendment 7A, which strictly prohibits the operation, launching, or hovering of any unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, or floating light fixtures within the airspace of Whispering Pines." She looked directly at me. The smugness was returning to her face. She really thought she had me cornered. I started to stand up, but Dave put a hand on my shoulder, gently pushing me back down. He stood up instead. He buttoned his suit jacket slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch out. Then, he walked right up to the front table. "Good evening, Brenda," Dave said. He didn't use the microphone, but his voice was deep and projected perfectly across the room. "My name is David Vance. I am legal counsel for the resident at Lot 42. Brenda blinked. "You can't bring a lawyer to an HOA meeting. Actually, according to Florida state law regarding community association proceedings, I absolutely can." Dave smiled. It was a terrifying, predatory smile. "But I'm not here to litigate, Brenda. I'm just here to give you some very friendly, very expensive legal advice for free." He popped open his leather briefcase and pulled out a single, crisp folder. He tossed it onto the folding table right in front of her. "What is this?" she demanded, glaring at the folder like it was a live grenade. "That is a copy of Title 49 of the United States Code, Section 40,103, along with 3 recent Federal Circuit Court rulings," Dave explained, pacing slowly in front of the table. "You see, Brenda, your proposed Amendment 7A is cute. It really is. But it is entirely, hilariously illegal. The airspace above this neighborhood is governed exclusively by the Federal Aviation Administration. You, a private corporate board, have zero authority to regulate it. None. We control the community," Brenda sputtered, gripping her microphone. "We can ban whatever we want for the safety of the residents." "No, you can't," Dave said smoothly. "If you pass that amendment, and if you attempt to fine my client for operating a federally licensed commercial drone flight in authorized airspace, I won't just sue the HOA. I will personally file a petition with the FAA for federal airspace interference. I will report this board for attempting to illegally regulate navigable airspace. And then, I will file a civil harassment lawsuit naming you, Brenda, individually, piercing the corporate veil of this HOA shield you hide behind." The room collectively gasped. The two old men sitting next to Brenda suddenly looked very awake and completely terrified. You can't do that," Brenda stammered, her face rapidly shifting from pale to a deep, alarming shade of tomato red. "I literally do it for fun," Dave lied flawlessly. "So here is the counter-proposal. You withdraw this ridiculous amendment. You officially repeal the original $1,000 in fines against my client. And you vote right now to completely strike Section 4, Paragraph 2 regarding unapproved permanent light fixtures from the Bylaws entirely." Brenda slammed her hands on the table. "Absolutely not. We will not be bullied. I am the president of—" "Brenda, shut up!" one of the old board members suddenly yelled, grabbing her arm. He leaned into her microphone. "We vote to repeal. I am not getting sued by the federal government over a raccoon light. I second the motion." "All in favor?" The other old man practically screamed into the mic. Both of them raised their hands instantly. They looked at Brenda. The entire room was staring at her. The silence was deafening. Brenda looked down at the folder Dave had thrown on the table. She looked at the crowd. She looked at me, sitting in the front row with a massive, uncontrollable grin on my face. She physically deflated. Her shoulders slumped. The absolute dictator of Whispering Pines had just been legally broken over her own knee. "Fine," she whispered into the microphone. "The fines are dismissed. The bylaw is repealed. Meeting adjourned." She didn't even hit the gavel. She just grabbed her clipboard and practically ran out the side door of the clubhouse. The room erupted into murmurs, and a few people actually started clapping. Gary from Lot 12 walked over and gave me a high five. Dave just packed up his briefcase, winked at me, and we walked out into the humid night air as undisputed champions. So, that's how you handle it. When someone tries to use a tiny little ounce of power to make your life miserable, you don't just argue with them. You don't just pay the fine. You look for the loophole they don't even know exists, and you exploit it so aggressively, so spectacularly, that they never, ever look in your direction again. Honestly, it's the core philosophy of sovereign ruling. Know the rules better than the people trying to enforce them, and then use those rules to build a neon fortress. The next day, I went back into my garage. I grabbed the two little motion sensor lights out of the trash can. I got on my stepladder and screwed them back into the wood trim, right where they started. The raccoon stayed away. The trash stayed in the bins, and my driveway was safely illuminated. Brenda still lives 3 houses down. I see her sometimes, watering her petunias or measuring the grass. But whenever I walk out to get the mail, she immediately looks the other way and hurries inside. She hasn't sent me a single pink slip since. And just in case she ever forgets, or just in case she ever gets another headache and feels like breaking out her clipboard again, I kept one of Zip's broken micro-drones. It sits right on my desk, looking out the front window. A tiny, silent reminder that while she might control the grass, the sky belongs to the feds. Have fun with this one. It's a ride.